if you've used Angular before, you probably are familiar with the ngRepeat directive, and you probably know that ngRepeat lets you write code like this that gets turned into this based on this. And you probably also know that when the model gets changed on a digest cycle, Angular will update. Angular will update the DOM accordingly. And the question I want to start off by thinking about is, how does Angular do this? So Angular has a pretty tough job. It needs to make sure that the DOM and the model are synced. So if there's ever a change to the model, Angular needs to update the DOM. So Angular has to think like, well, what kind of things can the user do that might change the model and cause a mismatch between the two? One of the things is typing into an input field, or I don't know, clicking a button or something like that. Angular doesn't know what kind of code you wrote, so it's afraid, like it might think that you wrote code that would cause a mismatch. So if Angular was really neurotic, it might have to, anytime you do something that could have possibly caused a mismatch, it might run through this array and re-render each DOM element based on the ending property, the ending state of this array. So if I did this, Angular might freak out and say, oh no, something changed, but I don't know what. Or something could have changed, but I don't know if it did or what it is. So Angular would say, let's just be safe and re-render everything to make sure that the two are synced up. And this is, a very safe approach, but it's very slow also, because theoretically it would be great if Angular knew that this was what got changed, and this is only linked to this DOM element. So I only need to update this DOM element. I don't need to update these other DOM elements. And, with 3, you're probably thinking it's not that big a deal, but imagine if this thing were really long. That would be very slow for Angular to do something like this. So Angular doesn't work like this. Angular is smart, and it knows that I only need to update this DOM element when this is the only thing that got changed. So how does Angular do that? Well, when the ngRepeat directive runs, what Angular does is it uses what's called a hash function, and hash functions have one output for every input. One input is not going to produce 2 outputs. There's not going to be one given output that 2 inputs could have produced either. One input for one output. So Angular uses a hash function that takes this as an argument and gives you a unique value. So it's going to run the hash function for each thing and add a hashKey property that's some unique value for each thing in the array. And it's going to use this hashKey to associate each item in the array with each DOM element. And now, once this association has been made, Angular uses it to know which DOM elements it needs to update. So by default, Angular knows that if I make a change here, I don't know, let's say I make it back to A, because this linkage exists, it knows that I only need to update this DOM element. And so this video is about the track-by property of ngRepeat. So what track-by does is it lets you override this. It lets you tell Angular how you want to set up the linkage. So one thing you might want to do is say track-by index. Let's make this nicer. Track-by index. And so first of all, index is, you have access to index for each iteration through the ngRepeat. So if I did this, this would be 0, this would be 1, and this would be 2. And if you say track by index, what it's saying is that it's as if this DOM element can talk, and it said, I want you to update me when the 0th index has changed. And it's as if this is saying, I want you to update me when the 1th or first index has changed. So by default, Angular without track by, it's as if this hash key were here, the value of the hash key anyway, and it's saying, I want you to update me when the thing with this hash key has changed. But when you override it with track by, it's saying, update me when the 0th index has changed. Let's look at the an implication of using index in this situation. So what if we added something to the beginning of this array, like this, foobar? Well, this has already said, hey, I want you to update me when the 0th index has changed. And the 0th index used to be this, and now it is this. So this is going to have to be re-rendered. And this guy said, hey, I want you to update me when the 1th or first index has changed. And the first index used to be this, and now it's this. So this is going to have to be re-rendered. And the same is true for this over here. So in this case, everything would have to be re-rendered. And using track by index turns out to be slower. So this begs the question of when would you want to use something like track by index? And because I just gave you an example of why track by index would be slower. So to answer that question of why you'd want to use it, I'm going to have to amend what I've said a little bit and introduce something new. So I talked about when you have an array of objects, but what if you have an array of primitives? Something like this. 1, 2, 3, or something. Angular has behavior where it doesn't allow you to ngRepeat over an array of duplicates. So if I had 2 1s, this would throw an error and it wouldn't work. And this feature allows Angular to set up a linkage where, because everything in this array is unique, it can be associated with a DOM element. So that's good. But if you want to have, if you want to violate that and have duplicates in your array, you're going to have to track by something that's unique. And the index is unique. Each one of these things is always going to have a unique index. So people often use track by index for that reason.